Let me start by saying this. When you've shared a life with someone for over 35 years, it's not just the good memories that stay with you. It's the little habits, the unspoken rhythms, the tiny ways you stitch yourselves into each other's daily existence. That's what made what happened feel less like heartbreak and more like someone had quietly erased me from my own story. My name's Linda. I turned 67 in April. Retired now. I used to be a school librarian. Quiet work, but fulfilling. I married Henry when I was 31, a steady, smart man who started out fixing boilers and ended up owning a modest HVAC company that grew slowly but surely. We didn't have children, though not by choice, just wasn't in the cards. But we built a life, a good one. Or so I thought. Henry had always been proud of how far he'd come. He liked nice things once he could afford them. A leather recliner that cost more than my car, imported cigars he kept in a special drawer, and more watches than wrists to wear them. I let him have that. I didn't mind. We didn't want for anything, and he made sure I was comfortable too. That was his way of showing love, I suppose. Providing. But over the last 2 years, things changed. He got quieter, more secretive, a little sharper with his words. At first, I chalked it up to aging. We were both slowing down, and his heart wasn't as strong as it used to be. But then came the odd receipts, perfume that wasn't mine, business dinners that sounded more like cover stories than actual meetings. Still, I didn't accuse him. I've never been the type to dig through a man's phone or beg for attention. Maybe I should have. Maybe that would have changed something. But it all came out one Thursday afternoon in the most humiliating way possible. I came home from my book club early. Marjorie had a toothache, bless her heart, and found Henry sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee with a woman who could have passed for a swimsuit model. Long black hair, red nails, high heels indoors. She looked like she belonged in a music video, not my kitchen. He didn't flinch, didn't even stand up. "Linda," he said flatly, "this is Celeste. I've decided we're going to get a divorce. I've moved some things around. You'll be taken care of." I remember thinking, taken care of? Like I was some tenant he was evicting with a severance package. Celeste didn't say anything, just gave me this smug little smile, like she'd already won. Like I was some dusty old frame on the mantel she'd finally convinced him to toss. I didn't cry. Not then. I just nodded and walked out, my knees trembling like paper. I didn't go to my sister's. I didn't even go for a walk. I sat in my car in the driveway for a full hour, gripping the steering wheel until my fingers hurt. He moved out that weekend, into a fancy condo by the lake. The divorce papers came fast, like they'd been drawn up weeks ago. He left me the house, a modest monthly allowance, and a letter from his lawyer outlining generous spousal support for a dignified retirement. The insult burned worse than the betrayal. But here's the thing no one expected, not even me. Henry died 7 days after he moved in with Celeste. Massive heart attack. Dropped dead on his designer kitchen floor while making a smoothie. I didn't cry when I found out. I didn't even feel relief. I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. 35 years. Gone in a blink. No closure. No last words. Just a mess left behind. Celeste posted a tribute online that same night. Gone too soon. My soulmate. With a photo of the two of them sipping champagne. That woman had known him for 4 months. 4. Then came the call from his lawyer. Apparently, Henry had updated his will right before he died, and she was listed in it. But so was I. I told the lawyer I'd be attending the will reading in person. I had no intention of fighting her. I had something better. The will reading was held at the firm of Denslow and Beckett, a stuffy little place in the old part of town where the lawyers still wore suspenders and spoke like every sentence might end up in a courtroom. To wit, it was the same office Henry and I had used for years, mostly for business filings, our living trust, and what he liked to call legacy planning. I showed up wearing the same navy suit I'd worn to Henry's funeral, not because I was still in mourning. Frankly, the tears had dried up, but Because it was a reminder of who I was, who I had been for 35 years. Celeste was already there when I arrived. She looked like she was attending a casting call instead of a legal proceeding. Tight red dress, heels too high for the weather, and oversized sunglasses she refused to take off, even indoors. She was all pout and perfume and entitlement, sitting there like the grieving widow. "Linda," she said with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So glad you could make it." I gave her a polite nod and took my seat. Mr. Beckett, the attorney, was an old friend of Henry's and looked more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. He shuffled papers like he was stalling for time. "I'll just get straight to it," he finally said, clearing his throat. Mr. Whitman updated his will 5 days before his passing. This most recent version names Celeste Marrow as a primary beneficiary. Celeste straightened up like a cobra sensing a mouse. Her nails tapped the leather armrest like it was a countdown to payday. He left Miss Smith Marrow the contents of his personal bank accounts, his luxury condo, his car collection, and all shares in Whitman Heating and Air, totaling an estimated $2.8 million. She gasped. Actually gasped, like someone had proposed on a yacht. I glanced at Mr. Beckett. He didn't smile. Didn't look her in the eye either. "But," he added, shifting slightly, "a prior will, still legally binding in one specific clause, remains in effect due to a stipulation Henry never revoked." Now it was my turn to lean in, hands folded neatly in my lap. I had been quiet long enough. Beckett continued. Per the irrevocable spousal trust established in 2019, Mrs. Linda Whitman retains legal control as executor of all estate disbursements and remains co-owner of any property or business acquired during the marriage, unless legally separated or divorced at the time of death. His eyes met mine. They were not divorced, only in the preliminary stage of filing. Celeste blinked like she just realized she was underwater. "What? But the condo was... He signed it over to me. It's mine." Mr. Beckett cleared his throat again. Technically, the property was bought while he and Mrs. Whitman were still legally married. The final transfer hadn't gone through. It remains marital property, pending spousal consent. She turned to me then. For the first time, really looked at me. The realization settling in like a fog. I smiled gently, like a grandma offering you a hard candy you didn't ask for. "You see," I said, voice calm as tea steeping, "Henry may have changed his mind about who he wanted to sleep beside, but he forgot to change who held the pen." And that's when I opened the envelope, because I wasn't there just to sit and watch. I had brought a letter of my own, a posthumous note Henry had written to me, not Celeste. Me. Dated the day before he died. It wasn't long, but it was apologetic. Regretful. He admitted he'd gotten carried away, said he didn't know how to undo the mess he'd made, that he'd intended to call off the divorce and talk things through after one last weekend away. With her. He didn't get the chance. I handed the note to Beckett. He read it silently and nodded, then handed it back to me. "Based on this," he said, "and Linda's status as executor and primary trustee, all assets will be frozen until legal clarification is established." Meaning, he turned to Celeste, who looked like she'd been hit with a bucket of cold water. "You have no legal claim until the matter is settled, and even then it is likely minimal." Her mouth fell open. Rage welled in her eyes. She stood up so fast her chair screeched. "You can't do this! He loved me! He told me he was changing everything for me!" I stood slowly, walked over to her. And for once, I didn't feel old or second best or invisible. I felt complete. "You got his attention," I said. "But I had his life." And with that, I left her standing in the middle of a law office with her mouth open and her dreams slipping away like sand through fingers. But oh, the real twist? That was still to come. But you'd think after the will reading, that girl would tuck her tail between her legs and move on. But no, Celeste was not the kind to go quietly, especially not when money was involved. especially not after she'd tasted the power of turning a married man into a fool. She waited exactly 3 days before showing up at my front door. No warning, no call, just strutted up my walkway like she was delivering Amazon packages instead of bad intentions. I opened the door, and there she stood in tight jeans and a smirk, arms crossed like she was posing for a villain audition. "You think this is over?" she said. No hello, no pleasantries. "You think you've won just because Henry didn't live long enough to rewrite a few documents?" I stared at her, unimpressed. "You should leave." But she leaned against the doorway and dropped her voice to a snake's whisper. "I didn't come this far, Mrs. Whitman, just to lose everything. Trust me, I always get what I want. You were just a leftover habit he couldn't shake in time." There was a flicker in her eyes, just a flicker, but it felt like someone had turned the heat up in the room. And then she said something that made my blood run cold. "You think his death was tragic? I think it was convenient for both of us." I blinked. "What does that mean?" She smiled. "It means you should really watch your back and your brakes." She walked off after that. Just like that. No shouting, no more threats. Just those words sliding into my brain like poison. That night, I couldn't sleep. My husband had been healthy. Yes, he was 72, but he jogged, took his cholesterol pills religiously, and was the kind of man who planned his meals like a science experiment. And yet he died suddenly, alone in his luxury condo, which he had barely moved into. Heart failure, they said. Natural causes. But now I wasn't so sure. I started digging. Not because I had some vendetta, but because I needed peace. Real peace. The kind you don't get from lawyers or court documents. I visited Henry's old physician, Dr. Ahmed, a gentle man who'd known us both for years. I asked him outright, "Did anything seem off when the coroner's report came back?" He hesitated. Off? Well, there were some inconsistencies in the toxicology, but the attending examiner brushed it off as background medication interaction. He was on several supplements, right? Yes, I nodded. But Henry was obsessive about what went into his body. Dr. Ahmed frowned. He was. That's why the traces of digoxin surprised me. It's a heart medication, one he wasn't prescribed. Could it have been accidental? He shrugged uneasily. Maybe, but digoxin in the wrong dosage can trigger arrhythmias, especially if someone isn't supposed to be on it at all. My heart felt like it stopped for a moment. Celeste had been alone with him the night before he died. She told everyone he went to bed early, that she had stepped out for a quick drink at the bar downstairs and came back to find him cold. But there were no cameras in the condo, no witnesses, just her version of events. I went to the condo building next. I asked to see the front desk logs. After a little pressing and a small tip, the concierge let me see the check-in records. Celeste had checked in that night, sure, but what stood out was the call log. She'd called a pharmacy at 10:27 p.m. I looked up the number. It was a late-night compounding pharmacy, one that specialized in discreet orders and overnight deliveries. My hands shook as I called them, pretending to be Celeste. I asked if they had my usual on file. The clerk hesitated and said, "We just have that one order for digoxin ampules from last month. Want a refill?" I hung up. I stared out at the parking lot from my car window. My husband hadn't died of old age or heartbreak. He'd been helped along, and now I knew why she had looked so smug. But she didn't know I knew. Not yet. The game was still on, and she thought she had the board in her hands. But I had something better. Checkmate was coming. Grief used to be the thing that made me sit quietly in the dark. But this time, it sharpened my instincts like a blade on a whetstone. The morning after Celeste all but threatened me in my own home, I called Mr. Beckett. Yes, the same from Denslow and Beckett, the law firm that had handled Henry's affairs for years. I told him I needed a private appointment, just the two of us. He didn't question it, just asked how soon I could be there. When I arrived at their granite-fronted building in Midtown, Mr. Beckett led me past the walnut-paneled conference room, the same room where Celeste had sat all smug in her white blouse, and into his private office. "Linda," he said gently, "I had a feeling we weren't done." I leaned forward and told him everything. Celeste's odd remarks, the veiled threats, her knowledge of things she shouldn't have known. I even told him about the digoxin bottle in Henry's old pill cabinet. Beckett sat quietly, listening, nodding slowly. When I was done, he opened his drawer and slid a file across the table. Inside was a draft of Henry's will, one I hadn't seen. "He came to us the week before he died," Mr. Beckett said quietly. "Told us he'd made a grave mistake. He wanted to amend the will, to cut Celeste out entirely." My fingers trembled. "Why didn't you tell me this earlier?" "Because he died before signing it," Beckett said. "It wasn't legally binding. But it gives us context, and in light of your suspicions, it changes everything." He made a few calls. One of them to a private investigator Denslow and Beckett kept on retainer, an ex-police detective named Marshall who had a reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths. Marshall worked quickly. Within days, we had damning evidence, pharmacy logs that proved Celeste had picked up digoxin using Henry's insurance just 2 days before his death. Text messages, recovered from backups between her and a friend, joking about how a little heart scare might push the will in her favor. Screenshots where she gloated about dealing with the old wife soon. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I simply asked Mr. Beckett if I could arrange a formal addendum session, an update on asset division with legal representation present. He agreed. Celeste came dressed like a victor. Tight beige dress, hair pinned, red lipstick like she was celebrating already. She barely glanced at me as she took her seat across the table. "This won't take long," she said airily. "I have a flight to the Caymans later." Mr. Beckett cleared his throat. "Actually, it might take longer than you expect." He pressed play on the video file we had queued up, a screen recording of the text logs. The messages between Celeste and her friend played out in black and white. The room went cold. Celeste blinked. "That's fake. You've manipulated that." Mr. Beckett raised an eyebrow. "It was retrieved directly from the cloud, legally obtained with consent from Mrs. Whitman as Henry's surviving spouse." Celeste's jaw clenched. "What do you want?" I leaned forward, calm and precise. "You think you've won something. But you see, dear, what Henry didn't leave you in writing, he left me in whispers. Regrets, warnings, and a trail." She shot to her feet, knocking over the chair. "You're trying to ruin me." "No," I said. "You ruined yourself. I just brought the mirror." Then Beckett laid the final card. "Per the moral turpitude clause of the estate," he said, "any party found to have acted with undue influence or criminal intent against the deceased forfeits all rights to inheritance pending legal investigation." Celeste's eyes flared. "You'll hear from my lawyers." "Please," I smiled. "I'd love for them to see what I have." And just like that, she stormed out. I never saw her again. Word got out. Her reputation in the city soured. The Caymans trip didn't happen. And me? I stayed in the house Henry built, sipped morning tea in the sunroom, and breathed again. I didn't need to destroy her. I just needed the truth to shine. And it did.